In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about the Django Rest Framework. So the Django Rest Framework is a library which allows you to build APIs in your Django project. So let's say you have a Django project here and you want to build an API so that others can access your data, or you are just trying it for fun or just want to build your skills. The Django Rest Framework is the best way to go. It allows you to easily build APIs with a lot less code. So the REST framework is very easy to set up, and I'm going to walk you through everything in this tutorial. So we're going to start from the scratch. We're going to first of all install Django, and then we're going to start a new Django project. Then we're going to install the REST framework, and then I'll show you how to integrate the REST framework into that Django project. So without wasting any time, let's get straight into it. So right here, I have my command prompt, and I already have it in this directory where I want to create my Django project. I want to first make sure that I have Django installed. So I'll just do pip install Django. Now this command line is for installing Django using Python package manager called pip. Now you can also install Django in some other ways like easy install or just with the GitHub code directly, but this is the best way to go. So I already have Django installed, so it should be telling me requirement already satisfied. So we should give that a minute. It should bring that up that we already have Django installed right here. So it's taking longer than usual, and then I can just cut out of that. Yeah, so let me just close. But I have Django installed, but for you, you should go ahead and install it. So now let's start a new Django project using the Django admin start project, and then let's say DRF, which stands for Django Rest Framework. Let's say proj. So Django Rest Framework project. So that command line is gonna start a new application or a new Django project in this directory. So this is the directory right here. So you can see now that it is empty for now, and boom, you see that we have a new project that has been started. So let's come back. Yeah, so now that we know we have a new project started, let's just cd into that project, dir first of all. So we see we have Django project and cd into it. So let's close that up. If I press dir now, I can see that I have managers py and dirf project. So this is my standard Django project. Now the next thing I want to do is to install the Django Rest Framework. Before I install Django Rest Framework, let me bring this Django project into VS Code. So let's open up VS Code. We can close this up, and then in file, I'm just going to come to open folder, and then it should take me to the folder which it should take me to the file manager, so I can go into that folder. I think it is drf toots, then Django drf proj. So this is the folder, and then once I select that folder, obviously VS Code is going to open that up. So as VS Code is doing its magic, let's come back to the command prompt, and then what we just want to do now is to install the Django Rest Framework. So let's say pip install Django Rest Framework. So this is how easy it is to install the Django Rest Framework, just a simple pip command. So this command line is going to install the Django Rest Framework on our computer. So again, I already have the Django Rest Framework installed, so it should tell me requirement already satisfied. But for you, you should go ahead and install that if you don't have that installed. So let's come back into VS Code as that is installing, and then let's just make everything clean here, so we can quit this. So you can see that this is our Django project. So for this project, we are not going to create a Django app, at least for now. So later we're still gonna create an app where we're gonna use serializers and stuff like that, but for now we're just gonna stick with just the Django project and the urls.py file in it. So that's where we're going to put our views.py and everything we're going to be using. So let's come back to the command prompt. As you can see, it says requirement already satisfied. This means that I already have the REST framework installed. So now that I know I have the REST framework installed, I can use the library in, or the module in our project. So now what I just want to do is to create a new file first of all, and then let me name it views.py. So in this views.py file, that's where I'm gonna code just like a normal Django project. First of all, let me import render. I'll say from Django.shortcut. So from Django.shortcut is the command line. Not command line, actually is the module. So the shortcut is like a class, I think, or like a function in the Django library in which you can import some things. So we import render, and now that is just for rendering a normal template file. But I want to use the API view from the REST framework. So the REST framework provides us with an API view class or function or whatever it is. So with that API view, we're going to be able to access a lot of type of APIs that is available in the Django REST framework. So when we use the API view, we can use something like a GET request or POST request and some other things that are being rendered or are being given to us by the REST framework. So first of all, we'll say from REST_framework, and then we want to .views, then we'll import API view. So I'm importing the API view from the REST framework.views. And then, as I said, this API view is going to allow us to create a function or a class on it so that we can be able to use everything available in this API view. But when we're also using an API view, we want to obviously send a response. Now, for example, let's say another developer tries to access our API, and once it sends a request to our API, we want to give the developer a response. We want to give him some sort of results. So let's say user send a GET request just to get a list of a query set or something, or a list of data. We want to give the user back a response of that data. So for us to give a response, we're gonna have to import response from the REST framework. So say from REST framework import .response. First of all, import response. So what this is doing is just saying from REST framework oh nope, this is wrong. From REST framework .response, you just want to import response. So that's it. Now that we have everything imported, we can now create a class to inherit from this API view so that we can get a lot of method that we can work with. So let's just have a new class, and then let's name it something like, let's say, you can say just test view, and then API view. So we're just naming this test view, and then this test view is inheriting from the API view, which is right here. So what we can do now under this class, we want to have a get function, which is just gonna be like a get request to this API. So we'll say def get, and then we have to say self request args, that's argument, and then keyword args, that's keyword argument, keyword args, just like this. So now that we have this function set up, what we just want to specify is the data. So this is a test view, and then in this test view we have a get request. So we want to have a data in which we're going to send back to the user or just give us a result. So we'll say data. For now, let's just hard code our data ourselves. Later we're going to show you how to use the Django model so that this data will be like from the database you have or something. But for now, let's just have a simple dictionary that we're going to send back. So let's just have a dictionary saying something like username, and then let's just say admin, and then number of years, let's say like number of years that the user has been active, and then we can give it something like 10 years. So that's actually a good user. So this is just the data. The username is admin and he has been active for 10 years. Let's just make that more specific. Number of years active. So let's just remove this. We don't need that. So just years active, so that's 10 years. So now we have this data that is in a dictionary format. So this is the data we want to send back as a response. So what we're just gonna do is to say return response of data. So what we just did was that we use this response in which we imported from REST framework.response, and then we're returning a response of this particular data. So now we have this done. What we want to do now is we want to go set a URL for this so that we can actually test this when we run it on our local host. So now let's come into urls.py. Right here, I just want to remove all this, don't need it. And then in here, first of all, let me have a new path which is gonna be empty. Now this empty path shows the home URL. So like when you just come to your website, let's say like google.com, that home URL is that empty path. So that's that. Now what we can just do is to first of all import that test view from .views. Let's import test view. So now that we have that test view imported, we can easily use it in here. So this is the home, and then we can just say test view. Since it's a class-based view, we have to add .asView. Now the reason why we're adding this .asView is because the view in which we are using here is a class-based view. If you're using a function-based view, you don't need to do that. You can just say test view here as the view. But since we are using a class-based view, we must do this. If not, it's going to give us an error, and Django is not going to recognize that as a valid view. So test view.asView, and then let's just give it like a name of something like test. So now we have all this set up. We have it linking to the home URL using the test view.asView, and we gave it a name of test. Now I want us to just run our server and test it immediately. But if we do that, we ain't gonna say nothing. We might even get an error. And the reason why I might get an error is because right here, what we did was we installed the Django Rest Framework, and immediately we just came to start importing everything in our project. But you know, if you work with Django for a while, you know you actually need to do some set configurations to be able to use some particular type of libraries, not all. So for this Django Rest Framework, we need to add some things to our settings. Now let's come into settings.py file. First of all, the first thing we need to add is in our installed apps, we need to add what we are REST Framework, unsurprisingly. So right here, we need to add REST Framework in our installed app, so Django is going to recognize it. Now after adding that, that's all to do with the settings. What we just want to do is under the URLs, we need to add one URL in which the REST framework recognize. So first of all, we need to import include. After that, we can just do path API -auth, and then we're just gonna do like a comma. Let's give it this a slash, and then we're just gonna include from the REST framework .urls. So that is that for that, and we'll give it a comma, and then we can save it. So now we can easily come to our command prompts and just do python manage.py run server. So now when we run this server, we can come right here, and then if we go to the home, actually we aren't going to use this for now. We just have to set that up because the Django Rest Framework requires that. So when we come to the home, it should give us this test view, and this test view should just be like a get. So just like a user sending a get request, and then we're just gonna give it a response of this particular data. So let's save this also, and then let's come back and see what's going on. So this should start running in a second. Let's wait for that. Normally Django doesn't take time to run, but I guess because it's a new project and we're running for the first time, so let's just give it a minute. Okay, so we have that done, and then let's come back to our browser. Let's open a new tab. In the new tab, let's go into our local host with the port of 8000, because that's Django default URL or something like that. So let's give it a time to load. Okay, I can see the title loading already. Let's give it a few seconds, and yeah, good. So this is what we see. Now you know that we didn't design all this page or this fancy UI that we're seeing. We didn't design it. That's what comes with the Django Rest Framework. It actually gives you this nice looking template to showcase your API and basically test all your APIs. Now as you can see, it's giving us in a dictionary right here. It's giving us username admin yes active 10, and that is exactly the same thing we have right here in data. So normally the API gives us a response in JSON format. Now it's giving us a response in dictionary format because that was what we actually set up right here. Normally it should be a JSON format. So when we're dealing with real data, real models, you're gonna see what I'm talking about. So as you can see, it's using the get request, and then the HTTP 200 says okay. So because it's allowing a get request because we specified the get function right here. Let me remove this, save, because we specified the get function right here. If we specify the post function, we're also going to talk about that soon. It's going to show right here that we are allowing a post request. So that is basically the basics about this Django Rest Framework. So if I come here and then I hit JSON, you're going to see now that it gives me this in JSON format. So right here, it just gives me in a blank JSON format, no template, nothing, just a blank JSON format. So that's if I go to this URL. But normally we just hit the home page. This is what it shows us. So this is good, and I hope you're starting to have a grasp of what the Django Rest Framework is about. Now, to be honest, it gets more complex than this later, but I'm going to walk you through every single thing you need to know to get started, and I'm going to simplify every single thing. So let's just come back to the REST framework page, and if we scroll down right here in installation, you see that exactly what is done here is what we have done in our project. So you can see it says install using pip, including any optional packages you want. So this is what we install, the Django Rest Framework. We can also install Markdown and the Django filter, but we don't need that for now because they are optional packages. So we just install the Django Rest Framework, what is mandatory. Or you could just clone the project from GitHub, but I see that as stressful, you know, so I just prefer using pip. So what we just did was to add REST framework to our installed apps right when we did it in the settings, and then we added this URL pattern that I said the REST framework requires. So we've done all that. We've gone through the installation. We've come here and we've seen the result of the APIs, and then let's move straight into Django Rest Framework serializers. Now let's talk about serializers in the Django Rest Framework. So serializers is a structure or a representation that represents a data we want to return in a JSON format or accept in a JSON format. So we can use a serializer to like transform our Django models into JSON. Let's first create a new app in our Django project, and then we're going to look deeper into serializers. So right here in where is that, in my command prompt, I'm just gonna opt out of this server that is already running, and then I'm gonna create a new Django app for this my project, and I'm gonna name it whatever I want to name it, maybe my app or DRF app or something. So first of all, let's opt out of these. So this should be gone within a second. And then yeah, okay. So okay, well, that was a lot I pressed. So now we can just do python manage.py start app, let's say DRF app. So this is going to start a new Django app in our project. So when this is started, we're just gonna go ahead and continue with it. So first of all, after this is started, we're gonna go into our models and create a model that we're actually gonna play around with. So let's just wait for this to do, and that should be done within a second. Let's give it a moment to do and see. So this doesn't take time. And so as that is doing, let me talk more about serializers. Actually, I wanted to explain more about serializers, because when you're getting started with the REST framework, it actually takes a bit of a while to understand what these things actually do. So the serializer is think about it like a form, like a model form. Once you have a model, the way you create a form for a model so you can submit in Django, so you can submit a form or update or whatever you want to do, think of that as a serializer. So serializer is just basically the same thing. You have a model, then you have a serializer that you link that model to, and then you specify the fields you want to be in that particular serializer, and then you just use it in your views. So that was the theoretical part. Now let's dive into practicals. So right here we can see that DRF app has been created successfully. Good, just remove that. So let's come back here now, and we have to create a new file and name it serializers.py. So now this serializers.py is the file where we're going to configure our serialization. For now, we're going to leave this blank. Now, as I said, we're going to create a new model that we're going to use. So let's come into model.py. So right here in model.py, let's just create a new model. Now I want to name this model like country. Oh, I changed my mind. Our name is student. And then it's gonna be from the models dot model. So let's give it some fields, and then let's say the name of the student, that will be models dot char field, and the character field should have a max length, and let's just say of 100. And let's give it another one like age, that's models dot integer field, and I don't think that takes any attribute. And let's give like a description of the student, models dot, it should be a text field, and that doesn't have any attributes. And let's say date enrolled, and that should be a date time field, so that'll be models dot date time field. And let's say auto now should just be equals to true. So I think we have this, and yeah, I'm happy with this. And so let's just def give it a string, yep, that, and then let's give it a self, and then let's just have it return self dot name. So now we have this particular model. Now, normally in Django, when you create a new model or you make any changes to the models file, we need to migrate it into our database. So we're going to do that right now. But before we do that, I want us to first of all register this app in our installed apps. So come into settings, and then right here, what we're just going to do is to say DRF app. That's the name of the app we created. So let's save that. So now that we have that saved, what we can just do is to come into our command prompt, and then let's just migrate. So say python manage.py make migrations. So we'll give that a second to make the migrations. It might say no changes detected. So I just like making sure I make migrations and migrate so I don't get any errors, because sometimes Django might be funny. So that should be doing okay. Yeah, so as you can see, it says create model student. Now let's just go ahead and migrate. So as you can see right here, when we said manage.py make migrations, what it did was just to make some migration of that model student, and right here is just migrating every single thing into our database. Auth admin, auth drf, that is our app, and that is what we want to see. So now that we have that migrated, let's go back into the serializers.py. So now we need to import the serializers from the REST framework, and we also need to import the post model from the models.py file. And after that, we can create like a serializer for our post model by specifying only some fields. So first of all, let's do from REST framework import serializers. So now this is how we import the serializer so we can use it. Just like the way you use forms in Django, I think from Django.forms import forms or something like that. That's just the way we import the serializers. So let's also import that model in which you want to use. So from .models import student. Now we have these two things imported. We are just gonna first of all create a serializer class for that student. So say class will be student serializer, and then it's gonna take from the serializers dot model serializers. So as you can see, it's quite similar to the form where we just have, like, if it was a form we want to use, we can say student form, and then we'll say forms.model form. Very similar. If you are used to using the Django forms, you definitely understand this. So now let's just have a class meta, and let's specify the model. The model will be student, and then the fields. So the fields, let's make it a tuple, and then let's just take 2. So we just want the name and then the age. So these are just the 2 fields we want to use in this serializer. Now it is that easy to specify a serializer to configure for anyone you want to use. So now let's head over back to the views.py file. So right here we're going to import our post serializer and our post model. So to do that, let's just say from .serializers import student So actually made a mistake. I said from .serializers, I said we are going to import post serializer, but we aren't importing post serializers, we're importing student serializers. We actually don't have post, but I'm just kind of used to saying post as like a model because that's what I use for examples most of the time. So we're importing the student serializer right here, class student serializer. So from .serializers, which is this, let's just make sure we have that. So from .serializers, we're importing the student serializer. So let's come here. Good. So now that we have the student serializer imported, let's just import the student model. So from the models, import student. So now we also have that imported. Let's come here and make sure that's correct. Student, yeah, that's student. So now that we have those two things imported, let's create a post method in our test view class. So in this test view class, we're going to create a post method so we can receive data just like in a form. So to do this, we'll just add a function below in our test view class. So right here, we'll say def post. Now this is going to be a post, not a get. And then it's just going to take exactly the same thing. This should be self. Exactly the same thing. And it's going to be self request args and then keyword args. So now that we have that, we're just going to specify our serializer in a variable. So say serializer equals to student serializer, and then let's just give it a data. So when we do something like data equals to request, so we'll do something like request dot data. So when we do something like this, what it means is that we want to use a form or want to submit a data or something like this. We want to say data equals request dot data. So beneath, we're going to say if serializer dot is valid. So first of all, check if it's valid. What we just want to do now is to say serializer.save, just exactly the way we do in a Django form. I'm always referencing to that Django form because it is very similar to this. As I said earlier, if you've worked with the Django form before, you understand what's going on right here. So serializer.data. So what I just did was that first of all, we specify the serializer. Now that serializer is this student serializer. So normally if we're not using a post, like if we don't want to submit a form, we can just remove this and say serializer equals student serializer. But I said because we want to submit something like a form, we have to say data equals to request.data. It needs to get the data which is being posted into this particular API view. So when we get that, we'll say if the serializer dot is valid. That means if all the values are valuable or are correct, just like if we want to collect an integer field, of course we want to have an integer field. If we are supposed to collect an integer field and we have a character field or a text field, then that serializer is not valid. So this is just checking if it's valid, if everything we want, if all the values are correct. And if it's valid, we'll just save it. So say serializer.save. And then we'll just return a response of that particular data which the user saved. So just like when you save a data, we just want to show back the user that so data has been saved. This particular data has been saved. But if this don't happen, we'll just return a response of an error. So say serializer.errors. So that is it. So now let's save this and then let's come here and just run our server once again. So what I want to do now, as that server is running, we want to test this particular API in Postman. So let me first of all wait for that to load up. So okay, that should be done. Okay, so it says module not found, no module named DRF project serializer. So what this is saying is that if we come back to our code, it didn't find a particular. Okay, good. So what this is saying is that it didn't find modules.serializer in DRF proj. So we're importing this modules.serializer. We're supposed to import it from here, but as we can see, we were importing it from here. So normally we're supposed to use like the views.py in our project. Actually, we can still use it in this place. Normally we're supposed to use it in the app, but we can still use it in the project. What we just need to do is to make sure that we are bringing it in from here. So let me just say from .drf app.serializers, and then from the drf app.models. So we can just save this, and that should work perfectly fine. So now let's wait for that to reload, and then it should run without any errors. Good. So as we can see, everything runs successfully. Now, as I said, let's come back to our browser. As I said, now we need to test this API. So there is an application called Postman. So let me open a new tab and show you. To get Postman, all you just need to do is to type download Postman, and then once you type that, you just hit enter and search it. So Postman is an application or software, anything you like to call it, which is used for testing your APIs. So since our app is not in production yet, or our project is not in production, is not live on the web or something, for us to test it locally on our local host, we can use this application called Postman. So right here is going to take you to the website where you're going to download it. Good. So it's going to automatically detect your OS. So as you can see, it changed to Windows because I'm on a Windows. Once you download it, just install it like a normal app, or the way you install normal software on your OS, and you should be good to go. So now that we have Postman installed, I have it opened right here. What I just want to do is to create a new tab right here, and then we're going to test that API in which we just created. So first of all, I'm going to come in here and then copy. So I'm copying that URL because that's the URL I'm going to be testing away. So right here, I'm just going to paste. So this is the URL I'm going to be testing, and I want it to be a post method. So right here, I'm going to come into body. So, and then I'm going to click on form data. Now I'm going to input key. So this key is what I want to submit. So let's see, if we come back into our VS Code and we come into our serializer, we can see that the fields required are name and age. So, and we know that in our models, name is a character field and age is an integer field. So to avoid any error, we need to make sure that we abide by everything. So name, let's give it a value of admin, and then key, that is the age, let's just give it a value of 25. So now if we send, it's sending the request. This is how Postman works. It's going to test that API for you, and then good. So as you can see right here, name, it gives us a response of this particular data, name, admin, age 25. But how do we know that this particular data has been submitted into our models? So what we want to know is, has this data been really saved in our database? For us to be able to do this, we need to check, or we need to open up our admin interface and set that up, our admin panel, and then check our database. So let's quickly do that. First of all, let's come back in here. We're gonna cut out of this server. So now that we're out of the server, what I want to do is to create a super user. So I'll say python manage.py create super user. So this is gonna prompt me to input my username and my email and my password, just like I'm registering for a platform or for a website. Just exactly the same thing. So let's give it a moment to, so I'm just gonna say admin. I'm gonna leave this blank. I'm gonna give it the password, bypass, and good. So now let's run this server again. And as that is running, we're gonna come into our VS Code, and in the admin.py, we're just gonna first of all import from .models, import student, and then we want to register that student in our admin interface. So admin.site.register students. So now this will show us that it has been registered in our admin panel. We're going to check that in a minute. Let's make sure this is running good. And let's come into our browser. Let's open a new tab and let's go to /admin. So let's quickly do that right now, and then let's log in using the admin info. Okay, good. So now we can see that under DRF app we have students. If I click on it, we should have one object in there. So as you can see, we have one student, which is admin, and we submitted that from our API. We didn't create this from this admin panel or from our project or from our website. It's through our API. Now let's go test that one more time. So we have this API, we have the name, and let's just give it something like admin2, and then admin2 is 27 years old. So now when I send, you can see it gives me admin2 27 years old. Now the reason why it gives me this is because if I come back here in our code, we'll see that I said that if it's valid, it should save that data, and then once it saved that data, it should give us a response of serializer.data. So that means if that is successful, the response I want to get is the data in which was submitted. So if I come back to Postman, anytime I get the data that I inputted here, that I submitted, it means that was successful. So let's come into our admin panel, hit refresh. Now we have another one right here. So that's how to submit from our API. Now that is cool. Now let's talk about serializing the data that is going out, and I mean the get method. So first of all, we already have our model registered. We already have created a super user. Now to use a get method, we're going to come back into our VS Code. Now what I'm saying is, as you can see, this get method right here, when we did it earlier, is just a blank data, just a normal dictionary. But in this post method, in this post function, we are using serialization. We are serializing our data. So let's say we want to also serialize the data in this get. Now what we're going to do, since we already have self request argument and keyword argument, we're going to specify a query set. So let's get rid of these, and then let's say like a query set, and that query set can be student.objects.all. And now what we can just do, we can say serializer can be equals to student serializer, and they want to specify that query set, and we need to specify one more thing, saying many equals true. Now the reason we need to specify many equals true is because this query set is a list of objects. So from this student model, we're getting all the objects, and what I mean by object is right here, all the data we have in this student database, all the objects. So as you can see, it is more than one. It's going to bring a list. That's why we have to specify many equals true. That means it's more than one. So after specifying the query set in a variable, I just have another variable named serializer, which is taken from the student serializer, and I pass in the query set, and then I have to tell it that many is equals to true. Now if it was just one data or just one particular object or something, we can just put query set, but since it's more than one, we have to put many equals to true. So now that we have that, we can just return a response of serializer data. So when a user tries to access this API using a get method, you're just going to return a response of this serializer data, and this serializer is a list of the objects in this student model, which is basically all the data in that site. So now let's save it, and then let's go test our API once again, but this time around we are just testing with a get. So get, we don't need all those. Let me remove this first of all so it doesn't see none. Yep. So now let's just hit send, and as you can see, it's just giving me a query set, a list of the data we have in our project. So it's giving me in a JSON format. Now if you don't see this particular square bracket, then that is just a dictionary, but since we see this square bracket, then curly braces, which is now taking each of the data, now we know that it's returning it in a JSON format, which is the normal and standard way of returning API response or request. So that is what we can do when we're talking about serializing our get request. But as I said in here, I talked about many equals true, but let's say it's just only one data. How do we do that? So first of all, since we have this query set, which is all the objects, and we know that all the objects is more than one, so first of all, let's get just only one of the objects. So we can say student, let's say student1 should be equals to query set dot first. Now what this query set of first does is that it's going to get the first object in this student model. So right here in serializer, we just do student serializer, and then we remove many dots true, and then we're not passing the whole query set. Now we're just passing only the first student, which is student1. So now we can just return a response of serializer.data. So let's go and test it once again. Right in here, using a get. So once we send, as you can see, it just gives us only that first one. So that's how we can easily serialize our data in the Django Rest framework. Now let's talk about authentication in the Django Rest framework. So what do I mean by this authentication? Now this authentication is going to allow us to protect our API endpoint. So we might have some API that we can just allow anybody to use without authenticating or without authorizing that user. That's fine. But we might also have some APIs which we want a user to first of all be authenticated, or we want the user to have an API key or a token or something before you can access that particular API. Just for example, when you use the YouTube data API, you need to provide an API key which you get from your Google Cloud account or something like that. So that API key is going to be used to authorize you or to authenticate you to be able to use their API. So let's do something similar in this tutorial. First of all, what we want to do is to come into our code. So right here in views, we're going to use something we call permissions. So these permissions is from the REST framework. So if I say from REST underscore framework dot permissions import, So when I say dot rest framework the permissions import, we are gonna get a bunch of permissions, a bunch of authentication lists. So like I can use allow any. Now this is quite self-explanatory. If I click on it, allow any, it just allows any access. This isn't strictly required, but you could use an empty permission class list just to be. So what this is just saying is that you can allow anybody to use this particular API. So let's also see another one, like is authenticated. So you can see we have his admin user is authenticated, it's authenticated or read only. So we have a bunch of it. So is admin user, that's also self-explanatory. It has to be an admin user before the person can access the API. Or is authenticated, this is the one we are going to talk about. So the user has to be authenticated into this our application before we can give the user the chance, or before we can give the user the way or something to be able to use our API. So now let's import is authenticated, this one. So now that we have that imported, we can use it in our test view class. To do this, we can just add the code right here. So let's say before any of the functions, let's just add a variable named permission classes. Now this permission classes is gonna give us like the permission we want to collect before a user can access any of these. So must the user be authenticated? Can anybody just access it? Must it be an admin user or whatever? So it's gonna be a tuple, and then we'll say is authenticated. We want the user to be authenticated. Let's give it like that. So we only want authenticated. Now if you want allow any, that means anybody, you can also just leave it blank like this. This just means that anybody can access it, or you can just remove that anyhow you want to do it. So but is authenticated means that a user needs to be authenticated before you can use it. Now let's save it and try something. If we come into Postman and then we just send, it's gonna throw us an error. So as you can see, okay, this is not the error we are looking for. So this is just saying that our host is not running. So let's come in here. So okay, it's running right now. Now let's try that again. So it's gonna give us an authentication error. Good. So it says detail authentication credentials were not provided. So now as you can see, it requires us to be authenticated or to provide some authentication token or something before it can give us access to our URLs, to our APIs. So now to be able to set up this authentication, we need to come back into our code, and in settings.py we're going to scroll all the way to the bottom, and then right here we're going to say rest underscore framework should be equals to the curly braces, and then we'll say defaults underscore authentication underscore classes, and then now what we need is a square bracket, and then we say rest. Now this should be in small caps, rest underscore framework dot authentication dot token authentication. So this is what we need, and then now we can save this. So we can quit this file, and then now that we have that, now to use this REST framework, we also need to actually add something. Let's go back to that settings, to the installed apps. So scroll up, and then in the installed apps we want to add REST framework. So as you can see, we already have REST framework added, but what we want to add is REST framework dot auth token. So that is different, and then we just save it. So REST framework dot auth token. Now we can quit it, but before we continue we need to run migrations. So let's opt out of this server, python manage .py make migrations. So after making migrations, no change detected actually. So let's just manage.py migrate. So this is gonna migrate that REST framework.auth token into our database. As you can see, auth token, auth token, auth token. Now let's just run our server back. Actually, I don't want to run the server back, so let's quit it out. We want to do one thing. So first of all, I want to flush all the data we have in this our database, so we can show you how to create a token for each user. So now we still have a user. Well, let's flush every single thing. So say manage.py flush. So this is going to flush all the data we have in our database. Just click yes and then done. So now we don't have any user. If I come in here, I should actually be giving an error that I'm not dedicated or something. So okay, it can't reach the page because it's not running, but normally the admin user is deleted. So now we want to create another super user, a new super user. Say Python manage.py create super user. So right now it should prompt me to input username. So username, leave that blank. Why? Good. So now we have that created. Now let's run our server back. So let's give it. So if we come back here now into our server, so it asks us to log in again because we flushed all the data at first. So we log in. Good. So if I come to home, you're gonna see now that I have an auth token app, and then under it I have a token model. So this is what we just did. So a good way to create a token for a user, or one easy way, is to just come into our command line. Let's opt out of the server again and say Python manage.py drf underscore create underscore token, and we just pass in the username. So this is gonna create a token for whatever username we pass in. So let's wait for that. It's gonna give us a token right now, and it's also gonna save it in the auth token. So as you can see, it gives us this token. Let's just copy that, and if we come in here and hit refresh on this model, we're gonna see that we're gonna have one object. Okay, so let's first of all run our server back before we go test it out, just to make sure everything is working. So now let's hit refresh on this token. Now good, you can see now that we have that token right here. The same thing, start with B, end with a C, start with a B, end with a C, for the admin user, and created at this time. So this is how you can easily create a token for a user. So now this user has a token. Let me now show you how you can use this token in Postman so you can authenticate. So normally we're just gonna come into our Postman to authenticate using that token. What we just want to do now is to go under authorization, and then let me first of all put this down a little bit. So the type, we want to change this type to API key. So it's giving me this because I've tested some earlier before. So let me just remove this and start from scratch. So the key, the default key for Django should be authorization. And the value, how you're going to write is going to be token, and then followed by that particular token which was created for the user, this token, which is the same thing as this token. So let's go back to Postman. So right here now, and we need to make sure that we're adding this to the header, not the query parameters. So let's bring this up a little bit and hit send. So now it doesn't tell us now again that credentials, that it needs some authorization credentials. As you can see, it gives us a JSON response. it says name is blank, age is null, and this is because remember that we flushed our database earlier on. So that's why it's giving us null. If we have something in our database, it's obviously going to show that to us. So that's how you can easily authorize or authenticate in your Django Rest framework. But now you know that, let's say you are using an external framework, like you want to use React or something in this your project. You don't want it to, you can't do this manually. Like as you saw, we have to come here to type python main.py drf create token admin before we were able to generate a token for this user. We can't do that for everybody on our platform. We want it to be automated. I mean, that's the main purpose of programming, right? So what we are just going to do is to send details of the particular user. So its username and password. We're going to send it to our application, and it's automatically going to generate a token and show us that token. So for us to be able to do this, I'm going to come into VS Code, and under urls.py, we're going to say from REST framework .auth token, yeah, this one, dot views. We want to import obtain auth token. So what this is going to do, we don't need to create a new view in our views.py. So this is a default or built-in view, which is from the REST framework.auth token. So it allows us to just send the user's credentials, and then it obtains the authentication token for us. So now let's add a new path. Let's give a comma, path, and then right here I want to say API slash token slash, and then let's just give it that obtain auth token, and then let's give it a name of something like obtain. So now that we have that, we can test our API. So first of all, let's copy this. Let's go back to Postman. So what we want to do is to open a new tab, and then let's set this to post, and then let's give it slash API token, and then right here we're going to come into body form data, and then we're going to give it a key of username. It's going to be the username, which is admin, and then a key of password. And then this password, I'm going to leave it blank because I don't want to show any password in this video. But once you just put the password of that particular user and hit send, it's going to show you the authentication token for that user, basically. So that is how you can do that. You can also access this from your code. You can do something like sending a request to this particular page and then getting the authentication token. So that is how we can easily authenticate a user in Django Rest framework. So I really hope you understood everything we did in this video. I hope you got the concept of the Django Rest framework. I hope you understood APIs. I hope you now know about serializers. I hope you now know about authentication in your Django Rest framework project. So guys, that's gonna be all for this REST framework tutorial. I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe.